Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the complex roots of division in early 20th century India and unpacking the massively consequential Lucknow Pact. Think about it for a second. How exactly does an empire maintain control over a subcontinent as incredibly diverse as India? Well, it takes some highly calculated strategies to manage and sometimes intentionally divide populations. And as you'll see, that inevitably sparks pushback. To untangle all of this, here is our agenda for today. We'll look at the roots of the divide, unequal paths to progress, rewriting history, a shift in alliances, and finally, the Lucknow Pact. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Roots of the Divide, the Strategy of Separation. Mahatma Gandhi actually hit the nail on the head regarding this era. He made this really striking observation. Communal harmony could not be permanently established in our country so long as highly distorted versions of history were taught in her schools. He recognized that the very narratives being taught to kids in classrooms were actively planting the seeds of societal division. So what did this divide and rule tactic actually look like on the ground? It was literally a multi-pronged attack. Administratively, back in 1871, they mandated Urdu as the medium of instruction for Muslims, while simultaneously justifying the partition of Bengal to physically splinter political power. Socially, they weaponized the caste structure to pit communities against each other, and intentionally painted historical rulers through a lens of religious cruelty to manufacture animosity. The end goal? Treating Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs as entirely separate political entities. Which leads us right into Section 2, Unequal Paths to Progress, Education in Economics. Now you have to look at the stark contrast in how different communities adopted education. The upper-class Muslim community, who were largely zemindars and aristocrats at the time, was initially quite conservative. They were fiercely proud of their native literature and pretty hostile to modern Western education. On the flip side, the Hindu community broadly embraced the Western system. And since modern education was the absolute prerequisite for getting a government job, this divergence created a massive, immediate imbalance in economic opportunity. And you know what? That economic imbalance was highly exploitable. This is where influential figures like Mr. Theodore Beck step in. He was the British principal of the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, and he actively swayed earlier advocates for unity. Take Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, for example. He originally saw Hindus and Muslims as one united nation. But under Beck's heavy influence in the 1880s, he completely pivoted, declaring that their political interests were fundamentally different. A real game changer. Let's move on to Section 3, Rewriting History and Rising Tensions. It's fascinating because history itself was literally weaponized. British and communal historians completely ignored India's composite culture. Instead, they erroneously divided history into strict Hindu and Muslim eras. They essentially fabricated a myth of decline, painting ancient periods as cultural peaks while framing the medieval periods as dark eras of decline, deliberately sweeping vast medieval contributions under the rug. And this bias wasn't just in textbooks. It was pumped into poetry, novels, and newspapers, fueling intense communal rivalry among educated youths, who were all fighting for the exact same scarce jobs. So naturally, tensions hit an absolute boiling point, and there were a few distinct catalysts for this. First up, the Hindi-Urdu controversy in April 1900, where the government mandated the Devanagari script for petitions, completely alienating Urdu speakers. At the same time, you had assertive nationalism, like the aggressive promotion of Shivaji and Ganapati festivals, which alienated other demographics. Throw in severe economic stagnation from colonial policies, and you've got communities fiercely competing for mere scraps of employment. Okay, Section 4, a shift in alliances, changing the status quo. The political landscape, however, is never static. When the All India Muslim League was founded in Dhaka in 1906, they initially aligned quite closely with the British administration to safeguard their political rights. But a rapid-fire succession of global and national events completely upended this dynamic. Suddenly, they found themselves pushed away from the British and drawn much closer to the Congress. This shift happened incredibly fast. In 1911, the British annulled the Partition of Bengal, which deeply disappointed the Muslim League. Shortly after that, during the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, Britain fought against the Turkish Empire. This was a massive deal because the Sultan of Turkey was regarded as the Caliph, the religious head of Muslims. So when World War I broke out in 1914 and Britain was fighting Turkey yet again, massive pro-Caliph sentiments surged. A rapprochement with the Congress wasn't just an option anymore. It became an absolute necessity. So, this brings up a really fascinating question. With both sides now suddenly finding common ground in their opposition to British policies, what kind of agreement could temporarily unite such deeply divided factions against a common authority? What would a formal alliance between them actually look like in practice?
That brings us to our final section, Section 5, the Lucknow Pact, a temporary truce.
The Lucknow Pact of 1916 was undeniably monumental. On one hand, it symbolized Hindu-Muslim unity. It healed the 1907 Surat split by bringing early and assertive nationalists back together, and it successfully pressured the government for constitutional reforms. But the drawbacks were severe. The pact was largely confined to wealthy elites, practically ignoring the everyday masses. Crucially, it solidified separate electorates for Muslims. By accepting this, the Congress sacrificed its purely secular character and officially acknowledged separate political interests based entirely on religion. A glaring example of these drawbacks was the communal veto. The pact literally stipulated that no legislative bill or resolution affecting a community could proceed if 3/4 of the members of that community opposed it. Just think about that for a second. While it was well-intentioned to protect minority interests, it practically guaranteed continued political division and permanently cemented a communal outlook into the legislative process. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Can a temporary political truce, built on the foundation of separate electorates, inadvertently pave the way for the ultimate partition of a nation? As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to wonder if the flawed compromises of the Lucknow Pact, while a massive victory for unity and self-government at the time, actually laid the very groundwork for the eventual tragic partition of the country on communal lines decades later. Thanks for joining me, and keep exploring the history behind the headlines.